Okay, so here we are at the next stage of the build. Obviously fitting a bigger turbo is all very well and good, and it's obviously going to get much more air into the cylinders, but that's not much use without the required fuel. So we're at the stage now where we're working on the fueling system. Injectors, we've fitted bigger injectors. There are a few options injector wise for this engine. The most common and most freely available one is the injectors from the 160 horsepower Insignia. You can always tell if they're the right ones because on the end of the numbers on top of the injectors it has the number 327. So we've fitted those injectors, or I've fitted those injectors. They were a bit of a pain to get out, if I'm honest. I did need a slide hammer to pull the injector actually out of its hole. Used a seat cutter to cut the seat inside the cylinder head to make sure that we were going to get a good seal. New washers are an absolute must, obviously. They were then fitted back into the engine. The fuel pump is out at the moment. Fuel pump has been released back there. You don't actually need to take the timing belt off. The timing belt was replaced some time ago. You can use 2 bolts here to actually hold the pulley in place so that you can then undo the center nut and just slide the pump out of the back. So the timing doesn't have to be touched if you don't want to. I mean, a lot of people use this as an opportunity to change the cam belt, but the cam belt was changed fairly recently anyway. As you can see at the back there, we've got a secondary oil catch can. Just as a sort of belt and braces type situation, really. You don't have to have that, but you know, if you're going to do it properly, why not? So we've got our 80mm MAF sensor here, which has got to go into the airbox. You do have to modify the airbox to make it fit because obviously it's larger than the standard 70mm one. That will be done a little bit later on. The fuel pump itself, this is the R80 fuel pump, which is going to be going back in it. If you could look closely, you can see, if it will focus, you can see R80 pump. Okay, so that will be going in. That will provide the fueling that we need to accompany the increased boost that we are obviously going to have. Obviously the injectors are the next stage. Fuel rail sensor, this is the fuel rail sensor on the end of the rail here. That's also been replaced. It's been replaced with a fuel rail sensor from a V6 3-litre Land Rover, and that's because it basically reads a higher fuel rail pressure than the standard one. The standard one maxes out at about 1800 bar, whereas this one will read up to 2200 bar, which then obviously allows us to increase the fuel rail pressure. Obviously fuel rail pressure is higher, the injection duration will then get more fuel into the cylinder, so you know there's several win-wins in that situation. That was already mapped in. All of these things need to be mapped in, so the fuel pump doesn't need to be mapped in, but to make use of it, obviously you'll need to alter the map so that the fueling is higher. Fuel rail sensor definitely needs to be mapped in. The injectors, you can get away without mapping them in, however, it will idle rough sometimes and have a bit of poor starting, so it's better to map that. The MAF sensor here, that needs to be mapped in as well, because otherwise the ECU is going to see readings it's not expecting and start kicking on engine management lights. This pipe across the top of the engine here, which someone's kindly painted red, that will come off in a minute. Basically there's nothing wrong with it, it just looks a bit bent, to be perfectly honest with you. Painted red with a little bit of sort of exhaust blow that's been there at some point on it. It just doesn't look very great, so we're going to take that off because it's easy to get at the moment and just paint it black, quite frankly, so you know it'll fit in with the rest of the engine. The reason we've taken a fuel pump off today is obviously to change it to the R80 pump, but it also gives us access to the inlet manifold. So the inlet manifold will come off today and be replaced with our new modified inlet manifold, which hopefully should also give us a bit of a gain because it's got all of the nasty EGR gubbins which just blocks things up, taken out. The stepper motor has obviously been taken out to give us better flow into the engine as well. So waiting for the gasket to arrive for the inlet manifold, so once the inlet manifold gasket arrives we can fit the new manifold, put pump back in, cam belt covers and everything else back on. All these other bits and pieces you can go back in, all the electronics plugged back in. This pipe can come off to be painted black. Once that's done, then we're just waiting for the exhaust manifold and then the next stage.